in GIS are for everyone, so it's important that our products are designed and readily available to all types of people with a diverse range of abilities. We should be mindful to create web content that provides equal access, reduces barriers, and embraces inclusion.
To talk more about the intersection of GIS technology and accessibility, we're joined by our special guest. Klara Schmitt is the principal product designer for ArcGIS Hub at Esri Inc., and she's also a passionate advocate for accessible web design. Welcome to the podcast, Klara. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, it's good to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Clara. Yeah, we did a webinar way back in May 2021 about accessibility, so it's really great that you're back here talking with our audience here at Esri Canada.
Yes, it was.
Yes, indeed. All right, so why don't we just start at the beginning? So give us an idea about what accessibility is and why it's important in the context of what we do in GIS.
Yeah, so generally when you hear accessibility referenced in the scope of digital tools or online technology, we're talking about giving people, all people, sort of equal access to content information. According to the World Health Organization, 1 in 6 people has a disability, and sometimes it's easy to forget that things that you or I might take for granted will not always work for other people. My exposure to accessibility started in college. I studied web design and interactive media, and many of the lectures were an instructor sitting at a computer speaking as they navigated through slides or a particular piece of software. And I was a compulsive note taker, and a classmate noticed, and she asked if I would take notes on a piece of carbonless copy paper for her. So she'd provide me the paper and I would take the notes. And that's the paper where if you write on the top sheet, it imprints to that like pink or yellow layer on the bottom. And the reason she asked me to do that was because she was deaf. And up until that point, I had not considered how challenging it would be to watch interpreters who are speaking for the teacher, while also like splitting your focus in between the interpreters and the slide deck, and also taking notes. So in especially complicated software, like some of the Adobe products, she noticed that I was like drawing diagrams. So that's why she asked me to do that on behalf of both of us. And that was an advantage that I had just learned to take for granted, to being able to split focus and take notes at the same time. I think it's sort of the same way with the internet. We often take for granted how easy it is to pull up information on our phones, tablets, or laptops. But if you add additional factors into the mix, such as someone who has to increase the size of text on their screen by 200% just so they can read it, or someone who gets dizzy when they experience animated web pages that show multiple loaders, or maybe do that smooth scroll animation that like a lot of people really love. They aren't necessarily having the same experience that you or I might have with the same content. And we don't want that. We want everyone to be able to get similar value out of published web content.
Yeah, that definitely it makes complete sense. And thanks for sharing your story with us. It helps understand a little bit about how you got to where you are. So that's great to know. And then we were also wondering, so we get a bit of an idea on what it means to be experiencing accessibility. But how is it that Esri is able to meet accessibility standards in their products?
It's true. Esri is constantly working to improve the accessibility of all of our products. And while there are many accessibility laws in many countries, so including the ACA, we follow the most current version of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which is often referred to as WCAG. And we follow AA, as this is the international standard that sets the foundations for many of those laws. The latest version of WCAG is 2.2, which was released this past October. And the new version contains 9 success criteria, 6 of which are pertinent to A and AA. So like the newest criteria include instruction on placement of consistent help, how people should not have to fill out fields twice in a row without a mechanism to help them do that. So those are like the checkboxes we often see for like shipping address being the same as billing address. And of course, I mean, there are some exceptions there. But they also had new guidelines for focus state not being obscured, the target size of buttons or links, how dragging functionality should work. So that will affect things like Hub's drag and drop website builder. And the one I find most interesting is that a cognitive function cannot be required in any step of the authentication process, which is inclusive of having to manually type in a password. And given how ubiquitous username and passwords are on the internet, you might wonder, well, how's that going to work? But it's not, I read through the guideline and it's not as strict as it would seem. They just want you to be, if you have an input field, you have to have the ability to copy a password out of the password manager and into the input field. And you'd be surprised. My bank, I won't call them out, doesn't allow me to do that. Like I paste the password in and it's like the field has no awareness that the password's there and I always have to press space and then delete it just to get them to register. And then another way that I've seen some companies do, which Esri doesn't have yet, but we've been doing research, is sort of those links where you can enter your email address and you get emailed like a login link. So we've been doing some research around that too.
Wow, so there's a lot of things to keep in mind as you're thinking about accessibility in our GIS apps, but I'm sure there's a lot of ways to be able to incorporate some of these accessibility standards within our everyday map making. So what are some of the ways that we can make our maps more accessible?
Great question. And also a tricky question. So obviously, Esri offers many tools and applications that help you publish data visualizations, which means that Esri has some unique challenges in ensuring our authoring tools and output information products are accessible to people with disabilities. Maps, charts, and graphs are innately visual mediums, so when Esri products are tested for accessibility, much of the focus is placed on the navigational interfaces around the map, and this ensures that the buttons, menus, forms, etc. are accessible to keyboard navigation and screen readers. But while we are also actively engaged in research and development to improve keyboard navigation and screen reader comprehension on the map itself, there are several techniques GIS professionals can consider as they author their own digital maps. So one, you can provide a text alternative to accessing the data on a dynamic or static map by including a data table, or even a link to a spreadsheet, could be Excel, it could be Sheets, near the map itself. If the map is static and is intended to communicate a specific purpose, you can summarize that information in adjacent text. So it might be on a splash screen, such as with ArcGIS Experience Builder. It could be in an area of narrative, like on ArcGIS Story Maps, a linked page, or in the item description itself, which often gets displayed in content details, such as what happens on ArcGIS Hub on our content pages, or ArcGIS Online in their item details pages. And if you're a developer building Esri apps, we offer methods for transferring focus to map pop-ups in our GIS Maps SDK, and we have a design system, CalSite, which comes with a component library that handles a lot of the accessibility interactions for you. Outside of keyboard navigation, we also have a couple of cartography resources you can use. In the ArcGIS Living Atlas collection, we offer high contrast base maps, and enhanced contrast dark and enhanced contrast light, which bump up the color differences between the features of the base maps, such as roads, parks, waterways. We also have a grayscale version of that is available from the ArcGIS blog and can be applied through a custom base map gallery. The other two are available through Living Atlas. And beyond base maps, we have a range of colorblind friendly color ramps available, and many of our applications actually have built-in color contrast checking as you build out your theme. And some of those are ArcGIS Online, ArcGIS Instant Apps, and ArcGIS Story Maps, just to name a few.
Well, there's definitely a lot of options then for everyone to keep in mind. I know a big part of keeping things accessible is like we have to be aware of what we're making. So it's great to hear there's so many options when we're making our maps. And I think you mentioned some already, but for people who are, not just making a standard map or app, the GIS developers out there, is there any way for them to test their applications to make sure that they're as accessible as possible?
Sure. So And definitely, if you know a little bit of JavaScript, and so you're like pulling together some of the different pieces, such as the Calcite, the GIS API, and some of the different mapping widgets, the bare minimum and probably the easiest thing to do is to install an automated accessibility testing tool in a browser. I like to use DQ's Axe plugin, which is open source. They have a version available for Firefox, Chrome, and Edge. And it also forms the basis for other well-known tools like Google's Lighthouse and Microsoft Insights. So I find it a pretty solid piece of software to use. And while automated accessibility testing is a great first start, the accessibility community really stress that you should also do some manual testing. So learning the basics for sighted keyboard usage, such as tab and shift tab to move through the page, enter for links, spacebar for forms. And also, it's a little of a stretch goal, but I definitely recommend it. Learn at least one screen reader. Thanks to me, most of the front-end devs on my team know how to operate one. VoiceOver comes built in on Mac, and NVDA can be installed for free on Windows. There's also Narrator on Windows, but I do find NVDA easier to learn.
Yeah, there's so much that you could really go into a deep dive in terms of accessibility and building your apps. But I think it's also really important to just sort of have that underlying knowledge that accessibility is out there and is something as GIS professionals we should be mindful of as we're building our maps and apps for our users. So we really do appreciate all of the information that you provided today. We always like to wrap things up by asking you sort of the 3 takeaways for our audience that they should know about accessibility and how it relates to the GIS work. So what are your 3 takeaways our audience should know about?
Yes, to sort of re-wrap up what I've mentioned before. So number 1, creating accessible applications is a partnership. We, as Esri, will strive to make our products accessible, but as content authors, you are also customizing the output informational product in ways that only you can control. 2, if you can, try to test your content from different perspectives, even if it is the zooming in 200% to see if the context still makes sense, or installing one of the browser plugins that I've mentioned. There are even additional browser plugins that let you simulate color blindness, or you can turn off animation to see sort of what the page looks like with no animation applied. And number 3, remember that not everyone experiences the world in the same way, and it might be necessary to provide information in more than one format.
Thank you so much, Klara. That's really great stuff to keep in mind. And you've given us so much to think about when we're working on our applications. Hopefully some people are able to put this into action in their own work. And you've been a real help with that. So thank you for coming and sharing with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
That was Klara Schmitt from Esri Inc. She is the principal product designer for ArcGIS Hub, and she joined us from her home outside of Washington, D.C.